Hello, I'm Jane Winter. It's my great pleasure to host this segment of the Marin Women's Hall of Fame show. Since 1987, the Hall of Fame has inducted 140 Marin women of distinction, women who have made immense contributions to the county of Marin and its residents, as well as to the world beyond. Honorees have distinguished themselves in many fields: education, science, business, philanthropy, the arts, politics, law, philosophy, and religion, to name a few. Each honoree has been a force for positive change in our community, and it is a great privilege to acknowledge and document their contributions. Today, we're going to have a conversation about Deb Hubsmith, who's being honored posthumously in the class of 2016 for her pioneering work in the environment. And we are very lucky to have three people in Deb Hubsmith's life to share her life story. And I'd like to start by having each of you introduce yourself. And Andy, let's start with you.
Okay, my name is Andy Perry, and I was married to Deb Hubsmith, and prior to being married to her, I worked with her. So we were colleagues, and she was actually my mentor in the bicycle and pedestrian transportation field.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm Wendy Callens, and Deb and I were partnered in launching the Safe Routes to Schools program here in Marin County, which eventually she took nationally.
Oh, great, and we're going to get to that a little bit later on.
And I'm Kim Bainish. I was the executive director of the Marin County Bicycle Coalition, and I first met Deb being on the board of the coalition. And when she was moving on to work with Safe Routes, I stepped in and took her place as the executive director.
Excellent. Okay, well, welcome all three of you. We're just delighted to have you here. You know, we are going to take a bit of a walk down memory lane with Deb. And you know, I know that Deb started her life on the East Coast and really spent her formative years in both New Jersey and New York. And, you know, I wonder, Andy, if you could share a little bit about, as a child, how Deb's parents influenced her.
So Deb's parents split up when she was young, when she was 5 years old. And so she spent most of the time, 90% of the time, with her mom and some of the time with her father. One of the stories that I've heard that's a wonderful story is when Deb became a preteen, her father taught her to ride a bicycle. And he lived in New York City, and New York City, of course, is not an easy place to ride a bicycle. But she learned in what is arguably one of the more difficult places to learn to ride a bicycle, with lots of traffic and lots of safety hazards. And she often credited that experience as being kind of a significant milestone, in her life, and something that influenced her later in her life to really love the freedom of being able to get around on her own. Her mother was very technically oriented way early on in computer technology, and very smart and very motivated and very driven, and raised her two daughters mostly on her own. So I think Deb got a lot of those qualities from her mom. And around 11 years of age, when she was back home, she began taking the bicycle as her primary mode of transportation. I just read a quote today. She called it her ticket to freedom.
The bicycle.
The bicycle, yeah.
I actually know how that feels. So, Deb was very passionate about the environment and building sustainable communities. I'll ask you all, when and how did this passion start for Deb?
Well, I think it started in college. She started as an engineering major, and she switched to environmental science, and that's really when it started for her.
And that was when she was at Lehigh University?
Right, okay. Right. There was a defining moment. She worked for Planet Drum, and she was commuting to the city, and this is a story she told many, many times.
Yes.
Where she was driving home from work, and it was a long commute, and she got in a car accident, and she was careening across the road and made a vow that if she lived through this accident, she would never own a car again. And of course, she did live through the accident, and she never owned a car again.
What a great story. A nice ending for a car accident. So, she, as you mentioned, that she had changed her major and ended up with a degree from Lehigh University in environmental science and resource management. So she's still on the East Coast. She graduates from California, but it sounded like almost the second that she graduated, she hopped in a car and came to California. And it seems like that move was really part of fulfilling her dream to lead a life of passion and spirituality and activism. What were some of the early jobs that Deb had that really helped to uncover Deb's ability to really affect lasting change?
Her first job when she came out here, as Wendy indicated, was with the Planet Drum Foundation, and she was doing fundraising for the Planet Drum Foundation, but her passion wasn't in fundraising. Her passion was in the mission of the organization, which was looking at something called bioregionalism, which is finding ways of living sustainably with what nature and the natural ecosystems and resources had to offer. But when she left Planet Drum Foundation and came to Marin, she began working, and this is probably, Wendy, where you can fill in, began working doing transportation work, partly because where she was living had very limited ability to get around, and she no longer was driving a car.
Right. She was the events coordinator for the San Geronimo Valley Community Center. That was her paid job. But she and I and a number of other people in the Valley got involved in a group called Go Geronimo. And we were finding ways in which, we had no public transportation out in San Geronimo Valley. And so we were looking at various ways in which we could get over the hill without a car. And we came up with this registration hitchhiking service that Deb was one of the key people to use it. And we were also looking at getting a real bus, which many years later finally happened in the form of the stagecoach. And
so that's the West Marin stagecoach.
It's the West Marin stagecoach. So while she was working for Go Geronimo, there was a sales tax being proposed on transportation. I was working for an environmental organization out of Sonoma County to try to bring the train back to Marin and Sonoma County. So I was on the committee, and she would sit in the audience. And one day, I gave her a ride home, and we sat down, and we were feeling like there's no outreach going on in this effort, and we need to be doing outreach. So we started brainstorming, and we found out that we both had the same idea of teaching transportation to children. And I happened to mention that there was, this came later, I'm sorry. So we came up with this idea that she would go around and do presentations to kids in the school about transportation, and by the way, talk about the sales tax and the train and everything.
What year was this?
This was 1998.
Okay.
And
we're talking about what now is known as the SMART train.
now it's not, yes.
Okay.
Actually, it was 97 because the tax itself came to the ballot in 98. But anyway, she decided that she couldn't just go and talk to kids. She needed something showy. So she converted her bike into an electric bike. This is before there were electric bikes, but it couldn't be just an electric bike. It had to be a solar-powered electric bike. And we had developed these activity books. So she had this bob trailer where she was carrying these activity books, and that's where the solar panels went. And this contraption never quite worked right, but I swear to God, she would never give it up. She says, I have to show up on the solar bike or they're not going to listen to me. And one of the things you learned about Deb a long time ago, was that you just don't try to argue with her. When she's got an idea, she's going to go with it. And it was true. The kids just flocked around this bike. And that's, in the course of that, I think, Safe Routes to Schools came shortly thereafter, but first came the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim, and then we'll go back to Safe Routes to Schools.
All right.
Yeah, I think it was through this experience of riding around on her solar panel bike that she started encountering a lot of the mountain bikers in particular who were really feeling challenged getting to their trailheads, feeling like they were not getting much respect on the road. And Deb, I guess, completely related to that and started once again attending their meetings. That was one thing she was always very eager to do, is be a part of the whole conversation and how can you make change. Mm-hmm. And so she started working with this group of mountain bikers who really wanted to see things change for their safety on the roads. And through various meetings, there was a decision made to apply for some funding to create an entity that could work on this. And pretty simply, she said, look, if I can get this first grant, which I think was for about $25,000, which would fund the activities of something that would then become the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. Okay. She said, if I can get this grant, I just want the title. I want to be the executive director. And the group, I'm sure, was just thrilled to have this little Energizer bunny saying...
She's volunteering her time, mind you.
Volunteering to do this, right? And they're like, great, you get the money, of course we'll give you the title. I mean, and that's literally how the Bicycle Coalition began. And she just started, with her passion about making change for cyclists on roads in particular. And it just blossomed from there. And she had a way of, getting things organized, meeting the players, finding out what are the negotiating points, and just rolling forward with some amazing strategies, bringing people together to just make improvements in so many different ways, through legislation, through bike plans for every community, through knowing the departments of public works to actually get the striping on the streets. I mean, it just evolved quite rapidly and quite expansively throughout her entire work in alternative transportation.
One of the first things she accomplished, and this was before Marin County Bicycle Coalition, was part of her Go Geronimo work, was to get bike racks on buses. So all those bike racks on the buses, that came from Deb.
That's right.
That's
and that is actually a first project that is credited to the Marin County Bicycle Coalition.
Right.
And that is entirely Deb's.
Because she started it beforehand, but then she finished it.
It really sounded like she had some real early wins.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's important to keep yourself motivated and inspired to be moving forward.
Absolutely.
But she ended up having some really huge wins. And one of them seemed to be there was an important partnership that was formed with Congressman Jim Oberstar of Minnesota that resulted in the first national Safe Routes to School legislation. And I was just amazed that came with $1.1 billion, with a B, audience. Yes. $1.1 billion for Safe Routes to School. I'd love to hear more of the inside story of how that all came together.
Who wants to start on that one? Should I take
go ahead.
All right. Well, Safe Routes to Schools came out of the riding the bike around. Deb and I went to the Marin Community Foundation and we said, hey, we've got this great thing we're doing. We're going and making presentations to kids. You should fund us. And they said, that's all very nice, but a presentation's not a program. Come back to us when you have a program. So Deb went on to found the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. In the meantime, I found this program called Safe Routes to Schools, which was exactly what Deb and I had been talking about. It was over in England. And doing some research on it, I was developing the program. In the meantime, she was, through the Bike Coalition, working with Patrick Seidler, who is a big bike advocate. They wanted to fund the non-motorized pilot program. That was Patrick's brainstorm. And they were going to meet Jim Oberstar to pitch the non-motorized pilot program. And when they got there, he said, that sounds like a great idea. I really want to look into it. But I heard about this great program out of England called Safe Routes to Schools, and I'm very interested in funding a pilot program. Now, you have to understand about Deb is she innately knew how to work the system. Mm-hmm. She knew how to raise money. She knew how to talk to elected officials. She knew how to bring the right partners together. So she immediately said, oh, yes, we're starting a Safe Routes to Schools program in Marin. You should fund us. and at that point, I was still in the research stages of it. But I was also, getting some funding from somebody from the state. So we basically, it worked. We got funding for the pilot program from the federal government, from the state government, and we went back to the Marin Community Foundation and said, we got a program now. And we had to make good in our first pilot program in order to get something started nationally. I was just focused on, let's make a nice little program for Marin, and it was Deb that had the vision of, no, we're going to make this go across the country. So we did incredibly well under her leadership, and I was the program director, and we were able to get from 21% of the kids walking and biking to 38% in a 2-year period of time, basically just out of the box. She took those numbers back to Jim Oberstar, and he goes, that's what I need. And at the same time, there was another program in Arlington, Massachusetts, that was also doing well. They were the other pilot program. And that's basically how it got launched. I also want to add, at the same time she was working on the national program, we were here in Marin to develop a sales tax that it was going to include Safe Routes to Schools. And both those things passed in 2004 at the same time, while she was still being executive director of the Marin County Bicycle Coalition and doing all the other things that she was doing.
So 2004 was a really
It was a
exciting
really big year. That was the year Safe Routes passed nationally, it passed locally. We got a permanently funded program over 20 years, and the country got a Safe Routes to Schools program.
Oh, how marvelous. How did that get rolled out across the country then?
Well, there was funding was made available, and when funding's available, people use it. Sure. There was an entity was created, the Safe Routes to Schools National Clearinghouse, or the Center for Safe Routes to Schools. But in the meantime, Deb wasn't done. Mm-hmm. She was still working full-time for the Bike Coalition, but she wanted to start a collaborative effort of all the different bike coalitions and walking groups and
Heart Association and Lung Association and any what ended up being 750 organizational partners for a new organization that she formed
called the Safe Routes to Schools National Partnership. And it started with a meeting in D.C. with some of the key players. And again, it was, a lot of the times Deb would start these things and people would say to her, oh, you're doing too much. We're not ready for that yet. And just like when I told her the solar bike was too much, she completely ignored people and continued on to do what she was doing and always succeeded, always. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, now 750 partners in the Safe Routes Schools National Partnership.
And her organization, that nonprofit, became, she was under Bikes Belong. Her budget ballooned to $3 million, and I think Bikes Belong budget was under the organization that she was under, her budget ended up being far exceeding the budget of the organization that she was under, which was Bikes Belong Foundation. this was all happening at the same time that she was working to get the Cal Park Hill Tunnel open, which is open between Larkspur and Santa Fe, the bicycle pedestrian tunnel, the Central Marin Ferry Connection Project, the bridge that's just being completed now over Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, Lincoln Hill Pathway.
Moving forward, Smart Train.
Moving forward, the Smart Train, two elections, 2006 and 2008. So you described her as the Energizer Bunny. There was like
Definitely.
many major projects all clicking simultaneously throughout this
those
period.
of us, I'd say, that would be kind of in and around her hemisphere, let's say, we're just always looking in and wondering, where does the energy come from? This woman was, so energized, so focused on this issue, and really skilled at strategy and negotiating and leveraging the partners and making the money show up at all levels. I mean, it was remarkable. And I think we read a statement about people saying that she squeezed in 40 years of work, or whatever it was, in 20 years, because she just would work these, 10, 12, 15-hour days all the time on all these fronts. It was remarkable.
And she talked really fast.
Really fast, yeah. Being from the East Coast, we
she
always
could get a
attributed it.
15-minute presentation before the Board of Supervisors in 3 minutes.
Okay. and that's a very good skill to have, to be able to talk really,
And be
really
articulate.
fast. And be articulate. Absolutely, absolutely. The other thing that I've heard said about Deb is that she was a really complete person. She obviously had this passion for active transportation and the environment, but spirituality and her love of nature, and also, I understand, she shared a passion for dance with you. It seemed to really help, ground her, and maybe this is where some of the strength and the energy came. For her to be such a strong activist. And, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about that part of Deb.
Yeah. Dancing was definitely a fundamental part of her life. There's a number of community dances that happen in Marin and around the Bay Area and even around the state, actually around the country. So she was very involved in this free-form dance, expressive dance. And we used to go to something called Summer Dance Camp, which is an event in the Sierras where there's 10 days of movement and dance classes and community, which she loved very deeply. But she had just been certified as a yoga teacher right before she was diagnosed with leukemia. She had just become certified as a Reiki master, which is a type of energy work or body work. And she was a meditator, and she was deeply nourished by spiritual practices that grounded her. When people found out that she was a meditator after seeing her in the public sphere, they couldn't believe it. They said, how could someone that's that energized actually be quiet enough to meditate? But she did, and she found I think the depth of the drive came from a place of stillness in her life. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, she sounds like just an extraordinary person. It's such a tragedy to lose her at such a young age, 46 years old, back in August of 2015. I wonder if Deb were here today, what do you think she'd be saying to young girls and women about getting involved in a very active way in your community? What advice do you think she'd be giving girls and women?
I'll just leap into it. I think she would, definitely be encouraging women to not listen to anybody who may doubt your vision and your passion, that you should really follow what you truly believe. And, the world will find a way to support you. I think that's where a lot of her spirituality would kind of come in to say that if you put it out there, everything you need is going to follow and make it happen for you. So, don't be deterred, don't be afraid, don't listen to the naysayers. Do what's in your own heart. You're going to make it work. You're going to succeed. I think, and that was one of her really strong beliefs, that she knew she could make some change.
Right.
Which, it's very rare because we all have our lack of confidence in this and that, right? Deb, I'm sure she had, issues as well, right? But she also seemed to have so much more of that positive belief in herself, and I think she would be sharing that in a very significant way with others.
I think also, the other thing that was very unique about Deb is she had the passion and the dream, and she also had the skills. And I think she would, tell them it's not enough just to follow your dream. You have to do your homework. You have to develop the right skills. And she was mentoring a number of women, wasn't she, Andy?
Yeah, she was, yeah.
Yeah.
I think something that I'd add to that, too, I watched her on many occasions run into walls. And sometimes they were men that were the walls. Gender dynamics. And what struck me again and again, I've seen sometimes we hit a wall, we get stuck behind the wall, and we're trapped there maybe forever. And she had this, the martial art of Aikido uses the energy of the opponent to move around. And she, like an Aikido master, would hit the wall and always found a way of moving around it and moving over it and continuing on. And the relationships, some things that would happen that would scar someone deeply, healed. So she had a deep capacity to heal the wounds and continue forward, and she was so driven and so focused for the end result that she wanted to see that she didn't let those things get in the way, because those things are all things that would drag one down. And so she was clean when she moved through her working life. And I think that's something that I think she would advise young women, to keep moving forward, don't get trapped.
Yeah, I think that's an extraordinary gift to give to somebody. I mean, it sounds like she was just extraordinarily fearless. And, she would have a vision of the future. She would be fierce in her determination of getting there, but it also sounded like she was flexible. She made changes.
She was persistent in a gentle way.
Okay.
She wasn't being like a man. She was doing what she did as a woman, using the skills that women have, with gentleness and persistence and openness. And I think that's what's really important. It's like so many people say women want to compete in a man's world. Deb created her own world. It was a very feminine world.
Yeah, she had a real skill of making friends. I think it's part of what Andy was saying about when there would be this obstacle. She had a really great way of standing back and looking at the situation and doing this objective analysis. Well, what's going on here? What's really their interest? What's their issue? And finding a way to go around it, because usually finding what was the commonality here and bringing people back together. Rather than being opponents, they were then finding those similarities. And being able to negotiate the bump in the road is like, well, if I have to take an angle around here, it's still going to get me over there. It's going to work just fine. So she had a lot of that ability to work with people in all sorts of situations. What
would you describe as her lasting legacy? I mean, beyond the physical things like the Cow Park Tunnel.
Yeah, the projects are all
and
very
the projects,
obvious.
all of that is an extraordinary body of work. Is there more to her legacy than that?
Yeah, it's all the children. The kids at Kent Middle School dedicated a bench to she and I for founding Safe Routes to Schools. And they read, statements to us about how Safe Routes to Schools inspired them. Now, this is one middle school in Marin County. We have thousands of schools all over the country that have Safe Routes to Schools because of Deb, who are changing the attitude of the next generation. I'd say that's something pretty special.
That really is. So, well, thank you, Andy and Wendy and Kim, for sharing stories from Deb's incredible life with us. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in. The Marin Women's Hall of Fame is a project of YWCA San Francisco and Marin. If you would like to learn more about the Hall of Fame and our honorees, please visit www.mwhf.org. And thanks for tuning in.